I'm Karyn Pugliese, and this is APTN News InFocus. Now, you'll usually find me reporting online for APTN News or on TV as the host of Nation to Nation. But on this special edition of InFocus, I bring you my conversation with Avi Lewis, who's the leader of the federal NDP. Lewis is new to federal politics, and at the moment, he doesn't have a seat in the House of Commons. The NDP is struggling. They only have 5 MPs, meaning they don't even have party status, which comes with money and resources. To find out where the party goes from here, here's my conversation with Avi that first aired on Nation to Nation. Avi Lewis was elected as the leader of the federal NDP on March 29th. The NDP is not in great shape. It was down to just 7 seats in 2025, not enough for official party status. And now it's down to only 5 MPs after 1 member crossed the floor and another left to run in provincial elections. Lewis is now touring the country, trying to rebuild the party. As part of that tour, he was in northern Saskatchewan to hear directly from communities. But before he arrived in Cowessess First Nation, Chief Erica Bowden warned him that he was going to hear some frustration. One of those frustrations is Ottawa's delay in resolving a land claim tied to more than 20,000 acres of farmland taken from the Cowessess First Nation. And Canada, they concluded negotiations in December 2023 and agreed on a settlement amount for that land. But the money has not been paid out, still not been paid out. Avi, welcome.
It's great to be here, Karyn.
So let's just start out with walking into that situation where there was a lot of frustration. We actually have some tape of what happened in that meeting.
It's kind of late, because you had your chance. Now, being only 5 people there, it's just like this bug on the floor here. You get squashed by the government, because now Carney doesn't need NDP anymore. You guys wasted your time up in Ottawa by not supporting stuff like this. Now you come here and say you want to support it. That's very annoying to me, because when you held the balance of government, NDP never did a damn thing to support this.
And so today, if you hear our frustration, if you hear that it's hard for us to trust anybody, that's our truth and that's our reality.
So, I think, first of all, I want to point out when she says our sister, Leah Gazan.
Leah Gazan, the MP from Winnipeg Centre, who was born in that part of Saskatchewan, or who grew up, and her family is from there.
Yeah, so she was there with you.
She was related to most of the people we met. And I think that, it was such a real moment, Karyn. I to get your butt kicked by an elder in this community space was just really real. And I appreciated it because this is such an extreme case. In the very first week after I was elected leader, the Cowessess First Nation wrote us and said, "Welcome to your new job." And by the way, we agreed with the government of Canada 3 years ago on a specific land claim for hundreds of millions of dollars. And we had a handshake and the deal was done after decades of negotiating. And then they're ghosting us. Zippo, silence. No money, they won't return our calls. We keep going to Ottawa, we can't get a meeting. And the frustration is so profound. They've buried, I think, almost a dozen elders since they signed the deal. How long do people have to wait for justice? They have all these economic development plans that are ready to go to use the money to create they're in that community center, which was built in the 1940s. And they said, we have a lot of memories here. We've had a lot of celebrations and a lot of sad and hard times here too. But we need proper facilities in this nation. So to sit with the elders and hear that truth, and they were not, they were unsparing. They were kind, but they were like, "Who the hell are you, white guy? You come in here, new leader, and you want to say all these nice things, but like, as the elder said, you had your chance in a minority government. Now, we got dental care for 9 million Canadians, and we got other important reforms, the beginning of a pharmacare program, but he's right. We didn't prioritize something like that, like a specific land claim. And you just have to really look it in the eye and say, there is every reason for First Nations communities to be suspicious of the entire political system.
Sure. And you know, like it's one of the things that I noticed because I work in Ottawa and up on the hill, and the hill spins like on its own top, right?
Yeah.
Like, and sometimes like when you go into a community, the thing that is most concerning to them is just so far removed from Ottawa or people's knowledge here.
Yeah.
And that meeting struck me, not, you know, of being typical of how a lot of Indigenous communities feel right now.
Absolutely.
So
and the distance between that reality and this bubble here on the hill. That same elder said he first heard in 1967. So that was the year I was born. And I'm almost 60. The first time he heard that the settlement was coming in 3 months. So for my entire lifetime, he's been told it's coming, it's coming, it's coming. And that's just that, you know, we talk about truth and reconciliation in this country. We haven't even gotten started on the whole truth and nothing but the truth. There's a lot of truth to be told, and that entails justice. And then I feel like there was a rush to reconciliation. Justin Trudeau, you know, he may have had some sincere, you know, feelings about all this, but it all moved so fast. And you can't do the reconciliation part until you've had the truth. And I think there should have been justice there in the middle as well. And so for nations like this, I mean, I think I was given a mission by those folks. Yes, we only have 5 MPs, but we're a national party. I believe we're going to come back, and we have a voice on the national stage, and we have an obligation. And the NDP has always been solid on this, although we haven't been in government federally to execute the actual plans, to fight for justice for First Nations. And yeah, that's an ongoing thing.
But how do you get trust back when trust is so eroded? And again, it's I mean, you had to face it like head on there. People were asking you, well, what are you here for, votes? Like you're here. And the chief made a comment later also that even in settling their claim, she feels like she has to go to government now and tell them what's in it for them.
Yeah.
If you give us the money that you owe us. So there's a lot of cynicism and a lot of let's say, transactional reconciliation maybe going on.
Exactly.
So how do you, as a leader, break through that?
Well, I think it's not like searching for votes or transactions. The NDP does have a history. In my own family, my grandfather, David Lewis, was the leader of the federal NDP in the early 70s. And my dad, Stephen Lewis, was the leader of the Ontario NDP at the same time. At the beginning of the Indian Brotherhood that came before the Assembly of First Nations, George Manuel and my grandfather worked together. In the early 70s, the NDP was the only party that responded initially in a serious way to the beginning of the frame of a nation-to-nation conversation. My dad, I remember when he left the legislature in 1978, he said that the biggest disappointment for him was he'd been working with Grassy Narrows and the mercury poisoning in the English Wabigoon River system. And I remember as a kid, like 7, 8 years old, seeing pictures of people suffering from Minamata disease, the mercury poisoning named after a big mercury disaster in Japan. And it was a thing in our household when I was a kid. When are these people going to get treated? When are they going to find the mercury? It's still ongoing to this day. I spoke at the Grassy Narrows River Run like 10 years ago, and I hope to go to the next one. So my family does have a generational relationship to these issues, and it's about action, not words. And I just think that was a reminder for me. We can say all kinds of beautiful things. First Nations need to see action. We're not in a position to deliver as the NDP, and we have to be honest about that. So we will use our voices until we shake some of this justice loose from the bubble tree here in Ottawa. And I hope that we can prove it with facts on the ground and not just with flowery rhetoric.
So I want to talk about Canada's electrical plan now. Mark Carney released a plan to double the production of Canadian electricity by 2050. And honestly, it looks like we're going to need it. Indigenous people tend to be very much in favor of renewables, but this also has, uptake that nuclear is going to have to be part of it. We don't know how much. We're waiting because it promised that there's a nuclear plan coming. I'm wondering, in light of the fact that the AFN is also just holding a conference this week, and they're talking about some of their concerns with uranium mining and also nuclear waste disposal.
Yeah.
How is the NDP looking at the energy sector, and how much is nuclear going to have to be a part of that future?
Well, first of all, I've seen up close the renewable energy revolution in Indigenous communities. I was talking about George Manuel earlier, who worked with my grandfather. Arthur Manuel of the Sokopak Nation, a great thinker whom we lost way too early, was a really important teacher for me. And I worked with Arthur on a few things. I had him on my talk shows in the 1990s. And he was a big part of the LEAP manifesto, this climate justice, Indigenous-led climate justice manifesto from 10 years ago. And at that first LEAP manifesto meeting, Arthur was there, and Russ Daibo, another important Indian teacher of mine, and Melina Labucan Massimo, who founded the solar project in Indigenous communities, which has done projects all over the country. And I think nuclear is, it's a big centralized energy system, big money, big infrastructure projects. So industry loves it. Government likes to sign big deals with big price tags. Renewables are cheaper. They're going in all over the world. This war in Iran has driven up the price of oil, and Europe and Asia are getting off oil and gas as fast as possible. And in this new electricity plan, the Carney government has put in lots of LNG all of a sudden and lots of nuclear. Look at the Chalk River example. Here's an Indigenous community where they want to put nuclear waste from all over, buried a kilometer away from the Ottawa River, like 150 kilometers from here in Ottawa. And
now they are saying it's low emitting.
Yeah, but it's a mix of different kinds of radioactive ice. Yeah, no, for sure. And whatever the situation of that, a federal court ruled that the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People had not been considered.
That's right.
In the consultation with the First Nation. And that's a perfect example of how if we put UNDRIP in our legal system, and Leah Gazan was instrumental and the NDP was instrumental in getting that in. I know there's a debate in the Indigenous communities around whether UNDRIP is a good goal for the colonial state or not. But right there, you had a court say, you cannot claim that there was real consultation when you did not abide by free, prior, and informed consent in this case of nuclear waste disposal on Indian land. So that's I think that's a big cautionary tale for environmental racism is a real thing in Canada. Mm-hmm. And it's Indigenous communities and Black communities in Nova Scotia that have experienced it, and marginalized communities all over the country. That's where they put the most toxic industries. Always has been that way.
Well, let me just say there's two things that you raise up. But first, still not sure I know how much is nuclear energy part of an NDP's version of how we solve the electrical grid problem?
Yeah, I mean, for myself, I believe that it's expensive and it's slow. Renewables are cheap and fast, and the inputs are free forever. And we see big industries like nuclear and oil and gas always go to the front of the line. We need more electricity, and it should be renewables first. I was anti-nuke for a lot of my life, from a kid in the 70s being scared of nuclear bombs and nuclear waste. I've evolved in my position, and I do believe that we shouldn't abruptly retire existing nuclear generation, because any zero emission generation, we need it, because we are driving the climate emergency in a really irresponsible way by endlessly expanding oil and gas in this country. So I would not be retiring any nuclear plants that exist. In terms of building new ones, these small modular reactors, they're still an unproven technology. And it's Doug Ford, no friend to Indigenous communities or to progressives in Canada, who is doing this multi-billion-dollar experiment in Ontario to try to have the first commercial grade SMR in the world. So I just don't know that it's ready for prime time, but there's a lot of money involved in this nuclear renaissance. So I think we have to proceed with caution.
Okay, the other thing that I wanted to bring up was Kebowep First Nation, which you mentioned, going to court. They're waiting for a final court decision. But really what a lot of First Nations communities are trying to model is what the Mayans have done, where they say, we've got our own laws. You're not going to come in and get our consent by having this list of boxes that you just check, and it's a checkbox exercise. We're going to make our own laws and tell you how you get our consent. and then you are going to come in, and part of that consent has to be the right to say no.
Yeah.
Where do you sit on that?
Yeah, I mean, another leader who's been a big teacher for me is Reuben George in the Tsleil-Waututh, where I live in Vancouver. And when they were fighting the TMX pipeline, Reuben was given the task by his elders of being the lead of the land manager for fighting the TMX pipeline. And they did a huge project of translating Tsleil-Waututh traditional law into English and into like a huge document that they presented as part of the proceedings in the TMX pipeline. And they actually said, this is our law. These are our lands. And this is how your project completely violates our traditional law, which we have translated so you can understand it. That kind of process should be honored. Instead, the courts just, and the governments just like railroaded over that. And they put in the TMX pipeline, and we've got now in the English Bay and in the waters that where the Tsleil-Waututh have brought back orca, eelgrass, herring. That those waters are starting to thrive again. Now we've got a tanker a day. The biggest oil tankers on earth, those Aframax tankers, there used to be one a week. Now there's one a day, thanks to that TMX terminus in Burnaby, right across from the Tsleil-Waututh lands. And I just think it's like, we either we're serious about nation to nation, and that means respecting Indigenous legal traditions, as well as rights and title, and the right to say no. The free, prior, and informed consent, you got to break it down. It has to be, it can't be an exercise in saying, this project's going ahead. Do you guys want a part of it or not? That's not free. Prior means before any work is done, all those conversations have to take place. And consent, and informed consent means the assessments, the impacts on the land and the water and the air and the communities, they have to be done before the project starts. Free, prior, and informed consent is like legal blah, blah, blah. But what it means is actually respecting Indigenous rights. And I don't see it happening in this country, even though it is now enshrined in our law.
I have to ask you about the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. Of course, it's been adopted into Canadian law, and of course, it was adopted into BC law as well.
Yeah.
There's a debate going on right there because they adopted it saying that all their laws had to be in line with UNDRIP, and they're not. And now they're trying to figure out what do they do about that.
Yeah.
I know you're the leader of the federal NDP, not the provincial NDP, but I just wanted to know what your thoughts were on that situation.
Yeah, I mean, the UN Declaration on the in the LEAP Manifesto 10 years ago, and Melina Labuca and Massimo of Sacred Earth Solar and Arthur Manuel were co-authors of that. We called 10 years ago for the implementation of UNDRIP in Canadian law as part of a climate solution, as part of, Indigenous rights are a key part of doing something about climate change in Canada. We're hurtling in the wrong direction, as we were then, we are now. And I just think that, we've done all the easy part of making formal apologies and making declarations and declaring about truth and reconciliation. But the hard work of fulfilling all of the mandates from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, from the implementation of UNDRIP, the hard work is actually nation-to-nation negotiations over specific pieces of land and settling those claims and making compensation for stolen land. That's the hard part. And it needs to happen. And I don't think you can make we've run out of symbolic gestures to make. And the hard part is actually taking those nation-to-nation negotiations seriously, whether it's the Cowessess First Nation or whether it's the Cowichan First Nation. What all these court decisions lead up to is the government of Canada and provincial governments have to sit down with First Nations and negotiate fair compensation for that land. As far as I'm concerned, private property rights are not the question here. This is a massive distraction. The Cowichan decision was really clear on that. Nobody's house is going to be taken away. Nations have to sit down and negotiate compensation. And then, as Cowessess First Nation knows all too well, that money needs to be paid. And as far as the NDP's position on it goes, we have always been for not just the symbolic gesture to UNDRIP, but actually embedding it in our legal framework and getting to the hard part, the truth and the justice, before we start talking about reconciliation. We want the government of Canada to do that hard work. And if we're elected the government of Canada, you will see resources put to actually settling those claims rather than endless corporate welfare being given to big industries that are already profitable. We got to get right with the first principles of this land.
And so I had mentioned off the top of the show that you had an MP across the floor. That was Laurie Edlow.
Yeah.
Huge loss, obviously, for NDP, huge gain for the Liberals. But now you've got Nunavut and the other Inuit territories. Are you going to be traveling up there? What are your thoughts on what the NDP has to offer the North?
Well, I really want to get to Nunavut, and we definitely plan to. As everybody knows, it's expensive to get there, and it shouldn't be. We need a national airline that actually connects every part of this vast land.
It's a little better from Ottawa, at least. It's like a straight
That's true.
You can go up after the show, maybe.
Yeah, maybe we'll just head up there after the taping. Yeah. Yeah, and also the Métis Nations are often left out of this conversation. And as I crisscross the country over the next months, I want to get everywhere. When we went to Saskatchewan on my very first trip as leader, we went to 3 First Nations in the first 2 days of the trip. And wherever possible, we'll continue that pattern of going to First Nations first. Because it's a fundamental priority in a party that claims to stand for justice. I mean, Laurie Adlaut's departure from our caucus was heartbreaking. But I think that on one level, I understand that Indigenous leaders who go into the colonial government have ambivalence about the whole process, and this is not their government. And I think Laurie was under a lot of pressure from her community to deliver material benefits, and maybe they must have thought that she could do that better from the government side. I hope it works. Because, there's still, my father went up to Nunavut 10 years ago on a fact-finding mission, and he brought the federal health minister at the time because he was an expert in infectious diseases. The fact that there's tuberculosis in the north because of housing conditions is absolutely scandalous. And the fact that we've got endless money for the oil and gas industry and sovereign wealth funds for extractive projects, and we still can't get enough money to Nunavut to have enough housing for the people that live there.
I've been hearing about housing since the Kelowna Accord.
Yeah.
And I remember talking to Jose Kuchak at the time. He was the president of ITK back then. Yeah. And he said, we don't need any more studies. We just need materials on a barge going up. We're ready for it.
That's it.
So, I mean, again, from the position of the NDP, if you're not governing, how are you helping?
Well, I mean, we've got to rebuild our party. We've got 5 seats. We have been traditionally a force for working people and for all of the marginalized groups in society. Those are the constituencies that we feel accountable to. You look at the Liberals and Tories. Who is it? Like for any politician, you have to ask what room full of people do they feel they're really accountable to? When I was in that community hall in Cowessess, and that elder was handing it to me, I was like, this is who I'm accountable to. And I think there is still a party in Canada that feels accountable to people, including the working class of this country, that is getting absolutely screwed by the cost of living crisis, while banks make $70 billion in 1 year, while 5 big grocery chains extract unlimited profits from us, while we cannot afford, like 1 in 4 Canadian families is food insecure. Parents are skipping meals to feed their kids. This is the injustice in Canada, where the rich, the banks, the big corporations are the natural constituency of the Liberal and Conservative parties. And there is one party in Canada that actually feels that the people, and the people who are having the hardest time, are the ones we're accountable to. That hasn't won us all the seats yet. But that's our mission. That's why we exist. And we're not just fighting for like electoral success or a few more seats. We're fighting for the change in people's lives. We're fighting for the actual housing to be built in Nunavut. We're fighting for people to actually be able to afford to feed their families. And that fight is like a lifelong struggle, but we're not going to stop until we actually change the conditions.
Well, a few more seats would get you party status and would get you on the committees. And I think, journalists in Ottawa, like we noticed that NDP voice is not there on the committees, just because it had a point of view that we're not hearing in the debates or in the studies. But just from what I've seen over the past year, it's a different kind of dynamic up on the Hill anyway, where the Trudeau government did partner with the NDP as having the balance of the votes in a minority situation. Right. The NDP was able to get some things that were important to the NDP. But now it seems like the Carney government, either has a majority. So what does party status really do for you? Or has worked with the Conservatives, completely ignored the NDP when it was in a minority situation, and worked with Conservatives to get its business done. So I guess I'm just wondering, you've got years left where you're not going to have party status. And then when you do get party status, the game might not work the way it used to. And so what ability do you have now to start getting things moving?
Well, I think, I mean, I've talked to a lot of journalists. I was a journalist for like 25 years, as you know. And I think our voice, first of all, the mainstream talk shows could start putting us on more. Because when I've done interviews recently on the big national political shows, they're like, oh, thank goodness the NDP is like back, because, they're clearly getting bored of just having conservatives and liberals who are singing from the same song sheet these days, as Carney has moved to the right. And these world-changing pieces of legislation like C5 that sweep aside Indigenous rights and environmental protections in the service of these so-called major projects, they're passing them together, Liberals and Tories. And so that means two things. There's huge political space on the progressive side of the spectrum for the NDP. And also, Canadians don't want a two-party system. I've knocked tens of thousands of doors in the last few elections, and I know that Canadians understand that a two-party system is what led to Donald Trump in the United States. Whether or not you vote NDP, I think most Canadians are happy that there's a party on the left that's actually offering a totally different vision for society. And that's our mission. So we can't affect the votes right now, but like politics is also about shifting the conversation. Mm-hmm. Politics is about affecting the political imagination. What is possible in this country when we're into building big things? Melina was on your show last week, right? Or recently, talking about a clean electricity grid that connects the country east to west so that we can build Indigenous solar and wind projects and trade that electricity across provinces instead of another bitumen pipeline. These are the kinds of visions that the NDP exists to put in front of the Canadian people. And I am confident in the next election that we'll get back our party status, get back on those committees and be able to make more noise, but more importantly, change the Canadian conversation so that we're not locked into this liberal Tory vision, which I think it's contrary to a lot of Indigenous communities' interests and also to the interests of the majority of Canadians.
Well, thank you for being here to make some noise on Nation to Nation.
Thanks, Karyn. Thank you so much.
This episode of In Focus was produced by Mark Blackbird and edited by Jesse Andrushko. Charmaine Stryker is the executive producer of APTN News InFocus. If you're enjoying the show, let us know by leaving a rating and a review. And if you have any ideas and comments, email us at infocus@aptn.ca. I'm Karyn Pugliese. Thanks for listening.
What is Indian status in Canada, and what can it be used for? We see a lot of comments online about how First Nations people can use their status to get things like tax exemptions, free housing, free education, and more. But what's the truth about status and the reality of these so-called free aspects? I'm Savannah Kelly. Join me and my co-host Jesse Andrushko on APTN News Answers, a new series where we shed light on topics related to current events and issues facing Indigenous people. Watch now on the APTN News YouTube channel.